The station trembled as the galaxy's deadliest warrior stepped onto its decks, wearing a grin sharp enough to cut steel. Commander Vextel moved with the confidence of a predator who had never known fear. His massive frame dominated the docking bay, towering over the tallest instructors by a full meter. Plates of iridescent chitin gleamed beneath the harsh station lights, their edges catching in sharp, predatory glints. 4 muscled arms swayed in rhythm with his gait, each limb corded with power, designed for tearing apart enemies without the need for weapons. His mandibles clicked in quiet satisfaction as his clawed feet scraped against the polished floor with a sound that made nearby cadets wince. The Krexari warrior had not come for pleasantries. He was here to correct what the Federation had grown too soft to admit, that the new recruits were weak, undisciplined, and lacking in the fundamental art of survival. His reputation had preceded him, of course. It always did. 3-time champion. Of the Death Rings, 200 matches, no defeats. Not one. Entire species had stories about the day they fell under his strike. Now, they whispered his name, as though speaking it too loudly might summon him into their nightmares. Vextel savored that fear. It was the flavor of respect, and respect was his birthright. He glanced around the bustling docking bay, compound eyes flicking over dozens of species scurrying through the station like vermin. Superians floated by in their ethereal shimmer. Granitians lumbered with stone flesh grinding against metal, and Mercians sloshed in sealed aquatic suits, leaving a faint briny tang in the recycled air. Pathetic, all of them, with their fragile excuses for bodies and their ridiculous reliance on technology. And then he saw them, humans, soft-skinned, pink things clustered together in a corner, like prey animals trying to look brave. No scales, no claws, no natural armor. He could break one in half with less effort than it took to snap an insect's leg. Their bones looked brittle, their skin so thin it might tear with a casual tap of his talon. And yet they walked with an infuriating confidence, their faces relaxed, their posture loose, as though nothing in this galaxy could truly harm them. It was arrogance masquerading as strength, and it made Vextel's mandibles twitch with disgust. How had such a fragile species clawed its way off its primitive mudball and into the Federation's ranks? More importantly, how had they convinced the galaxy they belonged here? Commander Vextel, I presume? The voice slithered from behind, soft yet taut with nervous energy. Vextel turned to find Threshneck, a Naga instructor whose scaled body coiled like a spring across the polished floor. His scales shimmered in anxious yellow-green, the color of prey sensing a predator. That's correct, Vextel rumbled, extending a lower arm in the Krexari greeting, though his upper limbs folded across his chest in a silent display of dominance. I trust my reputation precedes me. It does indeed, Threshneck said, his tail twitching nervously. Your combat record is unparalleled, as it should be. Vextel's mandibles clicked in smug rhythm. I've come to bring discipline to this academy. I understand you've had trouble with the new species. His compound eyes flicked back to the humans, who laughed at some private joke, oblivious to the lesson awaiting them. Threshneck's scales darkened toward amber concern. Commander, about the humans specifically. Perhaps we should delicate. Flowers needing special treatment? Vextel interrupted with a low, chittering laugh. Spare me the reports. I've read them. Deathworlders. What a joke. Their planet has slightly higher gravity and a few predators. Krexnar would eat their so-called Earth for breakfast. The Naga's coils tightened, his colors bleeding into shades Vextel had never seen. For a brief moment, the warrior wondered why a veteran instructor would look so afraid. Then he dismissed it. It didn't matter. Whatever secrets these humans hid would be irrelevant soon enough. He would teach them all what real combat looked like, and if they broke in the process, so be it. Standards would rise far across the bay. One of the humans, a female, small and pale, with dark hair falling loose around her face, glanced toward him for the briefest second. Her eyes were calm, almost bored, before she looked away again. Vextel's mandibles twitched in something dangerously close to irritation. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow she would be his example. Tomorrow, these soft-bodied creatures would learn what real death looked like. And for the first time since stepping onto the station, Commander Vextel felt something he couldn't quite name slither along his spine, a sensation he crushed before it could take root. He was Krasari, undefeated, unmatched, invincible. After all, what threat could one small human possibly pose? The station's main corridors pulsed with the rhythm of controlled chaos as Commander Vextel strode through them, his claws clicking against the reinforced floor panels like a slow drumbeat of impending doom. His presence was a living shadow, stretching across every alien cadet he passed. Conversations stuttered and died as his massive silhouette filled the hall. The shimmering Xiperians flattened themselves against the walls, their gelatinous bodies quivering. Even the granite-skinned Grantians, who feared nothing short of orbital bombardment, gave him a wide berth. Vextel drank it all in the hush. The instinctive retreat, the recognition that true power had entered the room. True power and a mission. He wasn't here for show. The Federation had grown complacent, softening its edges with treaties and diplomatic handshakes. But war was never far. And when it came, these recruits would shatter like glass if someone didn't teach them what it truly meant to kill. That someone was him. His compound eyes swept across banners, lining the high wall's proud crests of 100 species, who claimed strength, but had never seen the kind of brutality he'd lived through. Then his gaze snagged on something that made his mandibles twitch. A cluster of humans moving down the opposite end of the hall. Pink flesh, thin limbs, laughably fragile by every biological metric. Their uniforms hung loose on frames that barely reached his secondary shoulders. And yet, they walked with that same maddening confidence he'd noticed earlier. Their steps were light but sure, postures open, faces unshielded by fear. They even laughed, a sharp, carefree sound that made his chitin crawl. What could they possibly find amusing here, in the Temple of War? Threshnak slithered up behind him, coils whispering against the metal floor. Commander, the Naga instructor began carefully, his scales a nervous shade of amber. There's something you need to understand about humans before. Vextel cut him off with a dismissive wave of his upper arms. I've studied their files. Fragile skeletons, poor armor, minimal natural weapons. If this academy is truly letting such creatures into its ranks, then my presence here is more necessary than I imagined. Threshnak hesitated. Their classification, Deathworlder, it isn't just rhetoric. Earth is a myth inflated by species too easily impressed by noise. Vextel snapped, his voice carrying enough force to make a nearby cadet flinch. A mildly hostile biosphere doesn't make them warriors. And Naga's coils drew tight around themselves, a subconscious gesture of restraint. His tongue flickered nervously. Perhaps you should observe first, Commander. The humans, they adapt. They survive because the galaxy shields them, Vextel interrupted, mandibles clicking in irritation. But here in this academy, they will learn what real survival looks like. I'll see to that. They emerged into the training concourse, an expansive chamber alive with the sounds of combat. Energy blades clashed against alloy shields. Crystalline chardons sang as they dueled, their resonant bodies ringing with each strike. The air stank of ozone and sweat from a dozen species straining to prove themselves. Vextel inhaled deeply, his secondary lungs savoring the musk of exertion. This was his element. Then he saw her. At first, she seemed unremarkable, just another human cadet among the dozen littering the floor mats. Small frame, dark hair tied back in a loose knot, skin pale against the dark fabric of her uniform. But then she moved, not with the graceless flailing he expected, nor the stiff mimicry of a species out of its depth. No, her strikes flowed like water, each motion precise and efficient, every step placed with an instinct that spoke of brutal experience. Her fists cracked against the padded training dummy with a rhythm that reminded him of war drums. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation, only purpose. "Who is that?" he asked, pointing a lower claw at the human. His voice carried enough weight to hush the clangor of the nearest sparring circles. Threshnak followed his gaze, and his scales shifted to a shade so dark it bordered on black. "Cadet Zara Mitchell," he said quietly. "One of our top performers." Vextel's mandibles spread in what passed for a Chrysari smile. "Then she served nicely as my demonstration." Threshnak recoiled slightly, his coils tightening. Again, "Commander, I strongly advise." "Your advice," Vextel cut in, stepping toward the observation deck that overlooked the combat circles, "is noted and ignored. Tomorrow, I begin with the humans, starting with her." As he spoke, Zara paused mid-sequence and glanced up toward the glass wall separating instructors from cadets. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Hers were dark and unreadable, no flicker of fear, no spark of awe, just calm. Then she turned back to her training, as if he didn't matter at all. Something prickled beneath Vextel's chitin, an instinct he hadn't felt in years. He crushed it instantly. By this time tomorrow, that calm would be gone, broken under the weight of his power. The galaxy's most laughable species was about to learn what real war looked like, and Vextel, undefeated, unbreakable, would be their teacher, or so he believed. The next day dawned with the sterile glow of station lights, bathing the corridors in cold illumination. For most cadets, mornings began with stretches, drills, and the soft hum of equipment warming up. For Commander Vextel, it began with the delicious certainty that by noon, the entire academy would know exactly who commanded this battlefield. He strode into Training Bay 7 like a storm front moving across a quiet sea. His chitinous plates shimmered under the overhead lamps, polished to a sheen that spoke of pride and menace. Forearms crossed and uncrossed with slow precision as his clawed feet clacked on the alloy floor. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. By the time he reached the center of the massive chamber, silence hung over the cadets like a taut wire. "Attention!" His voice boomed, amplified by the bay's acoustics, until it seemed to crawl into every set of ears. A ripple of nervous obedience passed through the ranks as dozens of beings scaled, feathered, gelatinous, stone-skinned, snapped to attention. Even the towering Toggans, who feared little, shifted uneasily beneath his stare. Vextel let the pause stretch. He could feel their tension, taste it like iron on his tongue. Perfect. Fear was the first step toward respect. "For too long," he began, mandibles clicking sharply between words, "this academy has tolerated weakness. Inferior techniques. Lack standards. That ends today." His lower arms gestured to the sparring circles etched into the reinforced flooring. "Real combat is not a game. It is not posture and parry drills. It is blood and bone and survival." He paced slowly, eyes sweeping over the crowd like searchlights. "I am here to teach you what those words truly mean, to show you the gulf between a warrior." He spread his upper arms wide in a gesture of dominance. "And the rest of you." Uneasy glances darted between cadets. None dared speak. Good. Let them stew in uncertainty. "Now," Vextel said, his tone dropping to something almost casual, though the weight of challenge coiled in every syllable. Who among you wishes to volunteer for a demonstration? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to hush, as if the station itself knew better than to make a sound. Vextel's compound eyes drifted lazily across the semicircle of faces. Superians rippled nervously, their gelatinous forms trembling. The granite-skinned cadets stared hard at the floor. Even the predatory Toggon's creatures who relished violence avoided his gaze. How disappointing. Vextel murmured, his voice a mockery of sadness. No one brave enough to stand before a true warrior? He let his upper arms fold across his chest again, his lower pair hanging loose like weapons at rest. Very well, I will choose. He turned his gaze deliberately toward the cluster of humans at the far end of the line. Small, unimpressive silhouettes in their standard-issue uniforms. Easy prey. His eyes lingered for a heartbeat on each face before stopping predictably on her. The girl from yesterday. Zara Mitchell. You, he said, his voice cracking through. The stillness like a lash. One taloned finger stabbed the air in her direction. Step forward. Every other sound in the room seemed to vanish. Cadets turned to stare as the human detached herself from her group with infuriating calm. No hesitation. No stiffness in her stride. She walked as if he'd asked her to fetch a datapad, not face a Cresari war champion in front of the entire academy. She stopped in the circle opposite him, her posture loose, her expression almost bored. Name and homeworld, Vextel commanded, savoring the formality. Zara Mitchell, she replied, voice steady. Earth. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to her, she added, is this going to take long? I've got a thermodynamics exam at 1400. A ripple of laughter broke across the crowd like an uncontrolled fire, quickly smothered by Vextel's glare. His mandibles twitched with irritation. This thing dared make light of him? Your academic schedule, he said coldly, is irrelevant. Today, you are an educational tool. Great, Zara said, shrugging one shoulder. Always wanted to be useful. Another suppressed snicker somewhere in the ranks. Vextel felt heat coil beneath his plates, an instinctive surge of Cresari aggression. He began circling her, his four arms moving with the predatory grace of a creature bred for war. Tell me, human, he drawled, what do you know of combat? Enough to get by. She checked something on her wrist, a chronometer, he realized with an absent flick, as if she were tracking how long it would take to end this farce. Enough to get by, Vextel repeated, savoring the words like sour fruit. And what training do your kind receive on that mudball you call a planet? The usual, Zara said, voice almost lazy. Mame. Survival drills. Weapons work. Nothing special. Threshneck, coiled tight on the observation deck, whispered something that might have been a prayer. Instructors exchanged glances grim, knowing looks that screamed warning, but Vextel ignored them all. Nothing special. He echoed with a mandible-spread grin. How delightfully modest. Allow me to educate you. He stepped into position, lowering his stance, all four arms spreading wide in the unmistakable pattern of Cresari combat readiness. His exoskeleton flexed, his plates locking into place, like interlocking shields. Every motion radiated lethal precision. Across from him, Zara did nothing. No stance, no raised guard. She stood as casually as before, hands loose at her sides, eyes steady and unblinking. Vextel felt something strange slither under his chitin again. A whisper of doubt he crushed immediately. She was soft, weak, a relic of primitive evolution. This was no fight. It was a lesson dot, and by the time he was finished, every being in this room would understand exactly what that meant. Asterisk. The air inside Training Bay 7 felt like it had thickened into syrup. Rows of cadets lined the observation perimeter, their bodies tense, eyes fixed on the circle where two figures faced each other. The galaxy's most feared Krixari war champion and a human girl who looked like she'd wandered into the wrong. Commander Vextel crouched low in his stance, plates locking in perfect alignment, forearms rippling with raw power. His compound eyes tracked Zara Mitchell's every micro-movement, waiting for a twitch, a flinch, anything that might betray an opening. But she gave him nothing. No fear, no bravado. Just calm, loose stillness, like a civilian waiting for a train. It grated on him. He was Krixari, a living weapon, honed across 200 blood-soaked victories. He'd torn through predators that could swallow this fragile creature whole. And yet here she stood, relaxed, one hand brushing an idle strand of hair from her face. "You understand, this is a demonstration," Vextel said, his voice a serrated edge. "Not a duel. I don't wish to harm you." "Cool," Zara replied without looking up from her chronometer. "Let's make it quick." The insolence, the sheer audacity of her tone sent a tremor of fury down his limbs. Around them, the audience leaned in, a wave of held breath hanging over the circle. "Begin." Threshnak's voice cracked like a whip from the observation deck. Vextol moved. The strike was a masterpiece of Krixari technique, a palm thrust delivered with surgical precision, calibrated for humiliation, not death. His arm lashed forward in a blur, air splitting with a crack as his talons hovered a fraction from her skin. This was restraint, mercy, even. A reminder that she lived only because he willed it so. The impact was louder than he expected. A sharp, wet snap echoed across the bay as cartilage shattered. Blood erupted from Zara's nose in twin streams, splattering crimson against the pristine floor. Her head jerked back under the force, a mist of red flecking her uniform. Gasps rippled through the cadets like a sonic wave. Even the Toggans flinched. The Zepyrians rippled in distress. Someone muttered a prayer. Vextel straightened, mandibles twitching with satisfaction. "Observe," he called to the crowd, raising his gore-streaked hand like a trophy. "Minimal force, maximal result. This is—" He stopped. Zara hadn't fallen. She hadn't even moved. She stood rooted to the same spot as before, blood streaming unchecked down her face, eyes locked on his with an expression so calm it scraped against his nerves like steel on stone. She didn't touch her injury, didn't whimper, didn't blink. Ripple of unease crawled down his spine. Slowly, deliberately, Zara raised her wrist and checked her chronometer. Then, in a voice so casual it could have belonged to someone asking for the time, she said, asterisk, "Interesting. You've got about 30 seconds to walk away." The silence that followed was absolute. Every sound, the hum of lights, the faint whir of air recyclers faded into nothing. Vextel tilted his head, mandibles clicking in disbelief. "What did you say?" 30 seconds, she repeated, blood pooling at her lip. "That's how long it takes for my body to finish processing what just happened." Her voice didn't rise, didn't strain. It was conversational, almost friendly. "When it does, you're going to regret touching me." A sharp hiss of alarm escaped Threshnok on the observation deck. His scales flushed white, a color no one in the bay had ever seen. Vextel barked out a laugh. Too loud, too brittle. Threats? From a creature that bleeds like a punctured nutrient pod? Zara's eyes never left his. Black, bottomless, unsettlingly steady. Not a threat, a countdown. And then she smiled. That was the moment, though no one realized it yet, when the true lesson began. Vextel felt it then, a faint, crawling sensation beneath his plates, like his instincts trying to shout through the walls of his arrogance. He crushed it beneath a surge of anger. He was Krixari. He was undefeated. And this fragile, bloodied thing dared to lecture him about consequences? "Then let us see," he growled, lowering his stance again. What happens when the 30 seconds run out? In the back of the crowd, a human cadet named Marcus Chun leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Should we tell him?" Elena. Rodriguez shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on Zara. Too late. He just rang the dinner bell. Vextal exhaled once, preparing to finish what he'd started. Across from him, Zara rolled her shoulders, slow and easy, like someone limbering. Up for a morning jog. Blood still ran in scarlet lines down her face, but she didn't seem to notice or care. 25 seconds. She murmured. The words slid under his chitin like a blade. For the first time in years, Commander Vextal realized he might be standing on the wrong side of a fight. ChatGPT said, 25 seconds. Zara said again, her voice soft, almost casual. It didn't echo like Vextal's booming challenge had. It didn't need to. The words crawled through the silence like a slow-moving blade, slicing through the false security in the room. Vextal's mandibles flared wide, a laugh rattling out. Like metal grinding on metal. Do you think counting down will save you, human? Do you think your primitive psychology tricks intimidate me? His compound eyes narrowed, focusing on her small, bloodied frame. You are weak, fragile. The galaxy knows this. Zara tilted her head, a trickle of crimson sliding down her lip. When she spoke, it was calm, conversational, like someone explaining a recipe to a friend. That hit hurt. More than I expected. She flexed her fingers, shaking them once before clasping her hands loosely in front of her, which is good. Means the chemicals are kicking in faster. The ripple of unease that had started earlier began to spread across the crowd like a living thing. Every species could sense it, something shifting in the atmosphere, an energy building where none should be. Threshnack's coils tightened until the steel beneath him creaked. His scales had gone from pale to a chalk-white sheen, the Naga equivalent of raw panic. Chemicals, Vextal repeated, mocking her tone. This is your great secret? Fluid sloshing in your veins. Do you think biology makes you a warrior? Zara's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something behind them. Not anger, not fear, something colder, something older. Biology makes us survivors, she said simply. And survival makes monsters. A few of the alien cadets shifted uneasily. The Chardon crystalline students gave off a faint chiming noise, an involuntary reaction to high stress. The Voltari with their 6 limbs fluttered toward the upper rafters, instinct driving them to gain height. Even the Toggans, the apex predators of their own jungle deathworlds, backed up a step. Zara rolled her shoulders, slow and smooth, and checked her chronometer again. 20 seconds now, she murmured. Vextal's exoskeleton creaked as his plates flexed in irritation. He lunged forward a step, his forearms spreading wide in the Krasari stance, claws glinting like blades under the lights. You presume. Too much, little human, he growled. You believe pain makes you strong? I have broken predators that dwarf you in size, shattered beasts born to kill. You are out of time to listen, Zara interrupted gently, her voice cutting through his like a plasma blade through silk. Let me explain something before the switch flips. Vextal froze mid-step, confusion threading through. His anger. When you hit me, Zara said, you didn't just break cartilage. You lit a fuse. She began pacing slowly, her boots whispering against the mat. See, when humans get hurt, really hurt, our bodies dump a cocktail of chemicals into our system. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, heart rate spikes, blood flow reroutes. Our muscles, she held up her hands, flexing them as if admiring the tendons, stop listening to rules about efficiency and start listening to survival. Her eyes flicked up to lock with his. That means, Commander, that everything holding me back, fatigue, pain, hesitation burns away. For the next few minutes, I won't feel broken. I won't feel fear. I'll just hunt. Someone in the back audibly swallowed. Vextal laughed again, but the sound cracked at the edges. So your answer to defeat is to become reckless? A mindless berserker? Zara smiled. It wasn't wide or menacing. It was small, pleasant, the kind of smile someone gave before saying something polite. And somehow, that made it terrifying. No, Commander. Not mindless, just focused. Focused on making sure you regret touching me. She checked her chronometer one more time, then glanced back up, dark eyes steady and calm in a way that no praise should ever be. 15 seconds. The silence in the bay was a living thing now. It pressed against lungs and eardrums. Even the environmental systems sounded muted, like they were holding their breath. The alien cadets began backing away in small, subconscious steps, creating a widening ring around the two figures. The humans didn't move. They just watched with the detached patience of people who knew exactly how this story ended. Vextal snarled, the sound grinding like stones under pressure. His pride, his fury, his entire worldview screamed at him to strike, to silence her insolence before the weight of her words grew any heavier. He lunged forward another step, claws slashing the air with lethal precision. 10 seconds, Zara, whispered Dot Asterisk. That was the moment every Krasari instinct in Vextal screamed a warning he didn't understand. The moment a flicker of something icy slid down his spine. The moment he realized, too late, that whatever stood before him wasn't prey anymore, that it was a predator waiting for the cage door to open. That asterisk 9 seconds. That number wasn't just a whisper in the air anymore. It was a drumbeat inside Commander. Vextal's skull. Every instinct he had, every twitch of his antennae, screamed for decisive action. Strike now. Crush her before this strange theater could unfold any further. And yet, something made him hesitate. Not fear, he told himself. Not that. A warrior of the Death Rings did not fear. This was irritation. Annoyance, that was all. 5 seconds, Zara murmured, her voice soft, pleasant like a teacher counting down to recess. The words slid under his plates like acid. Enough. He lunged out all 4 arms, slashed toward her in a blur of claws. A killing storm designed to overwhelm. The mat cracked beneath the force of his weight as he drove forward. His compound eyes tracked every angle, every probability of counterattack, his mind calculating the precise moment her fragile bones would give way, and then she vanished. There was no wind-up, no warning, no telegraph of intent. One instant Zara stood in front of him, a slim silhouette with blood dripping from her nose. The next, she was simply gone. Vextal's vision spun as his instincts screamed reacquire the target. Too slow. Something slammed into his primary arm, a force not wild, but precise, controlled. It hooked just above the elbow joint, where the chitin was thickest. How? The word tore from his mandibles. Half-formed snap. The sound echoed. Through training bay 7 like a rifle shot. Not the brittle crack of fractured bone. This was deeper, denser. A splintering rupture of something engineered to never break. Pain detonated across Vextal's nervous system. A white-hot flood that stole the air from his lungs. His scream started high, a keening wail that fractured into a staccato of clicks and chittering curses. His primary arm, his dominant limb, the one that had shattered 200 opponents, now dangled uselessly, bent backward at an angle that mocked anatomy. Green Krasari blood oozed in thick rivulets, painting jagged patterns across his iridescent plates. The joint plates that had deflected plasma blades now spider-webbed with fractures. Neural pain receptors fired in a symphony of agony. Zara stepped back, calm, measured. She wiped her bloodied nose on her sleeve, like it was an afterthought, and regarded him with the same mild interest one might give a malfunctioning vending unit. "There," she said softly, almost kindly. "Now we're even." For a heartbeat, one long, merciless heartbeat, no one moved. The bay was silent save for Vextal's ragged, metallic breathing and the distant hum of environmental systems, struggling to mask the scent of Cresari hemolymph. Then chaos erupted. Asterisk, as Hyperions convulsed into shimmering panic, their gelatinous bodies rippling as they fled toward the far walls. The crystalline Chardons sang in a chorus of alarm, their bodies chiming like shattered glass as they scrambled for the exits. Even the Toggans, the apex brutes of their homeworld jungles, backed away, Tusk's jaws slack with something they'd never admit was feared. Above, Threshnak moved so fast the observation rail groaned under his coils. His scales flashed in a riot of pale shades no one had ever documented. "Medical team to Bay 7, he shrieked into the comm. "Emergency. Triage commander down." But no one looked at Vextal anymore. Every eye, every lens, every cluster of pupils was fixed on Zara. She didn't gloat, didn't roar, didn't posture over her broken opponent. She simply checked her chronometer again. 3 seconds, she said quietly, as if noting the time for herself. "Guess I'm running a little early." Vextal collapsed onto one knee, legs trembling under the weight of agony. His 3 remaining arms clawed at the mat, trying to anchor himself against the vertigo of failure. His compound eyes, those proud, predatory orbs, found hers again. And for the first time since hatching, Commander Vextal understood the taste of fear. How? The word crawled from his throat like a dying thing. How is this possible? Zara met his gaze, calm as starlight. "You asked what humans know of combat," she said, voice soft but carrying to every trembling ear in the bay. "We know this. Everything breaks. The trick is knowing where to push." Her words fell into the silence like iron weights. "Class dismissed," she added, turning her back on him without a flicker of hesitation. Blood still streaked her face, a crimson badge of something none of these species had a name for yet. Something raw, something terrifying. By the time the medics arrived with anti-grav stretchers and bone stabilizers, Vextal was no longer thinking of his shattered arm. He was thinking of Earth, a planet he'd called soft, a species he'd called weak. A mistake he'd just paid for in blood and humiliation. And deep in the hollow of his chest, a thought coiled like a parasite he couldn't shake. What happens when one of them really tries? Asterisk, the training bay smelled of blood and antiseptic foam as the medics hovered over Commander Vextal, their 6-fingered hands moving in practiced coordination. The hum of an anti-grav stretcher broke the silence, its blue field shimmering as they prepared to lift the shattered Cresari onto it. Each movement sent fresh spikes of agony screaming through his body. He bit down hard on his mandibles to keep from howling again, but the tremor rippling through his plates betrayed the effort. His dominant arm hung in an unnatural curve, encased in a temporary polymer splint that glowed faintly as it fused around the fracture. Thick green hemolymph seeped sluggishly into the bandages before the medics sealed it with clotting spray. Crexory bone wasn't supposed to break, not like this. Not from a single strike. Around the edges of the bay, maintenance drones scrubbed frantically at the floor, erasing the red and green splatter pattern that told the story better than any report ever could. The cadets were gone, most fled in stunned silence, some in open terror. But the memory of what they had witnessed would ripple through the academy like a shockwave. Up on the observation deck, Threshnak coiled tight, his scales cycling through. Colors in rapid, chaotic bursts, fear, disbelief, and something like grim resignation. Beside him, Instructor Kalaman, the old Centaurn with skin like burnished bronze, finally broke the silence. "Well," Kalaman said, his voice gravel-soft, "that could have gone worse." Threshnak swung his head toward him, eyes wide with incredulity. "Worse?" he hissed, his voice cracking. "The Krexare champion, the one sent here to raise our standards, is leaving Bay 7 with an arm bent like a pretzel and half his ego leaking on the floor. How could this possibly have gone worse?" Calaman gave a humorless snort. Could have been his spine instead of his arm. Threshneck didn't laugh. He was too busy staring at the place where Zara Mitchell had been standing minutes earlier, still faintly marked by drops of her blood. "She warned him," the Naga murmured, his coils tightening reflexively. 30 seconds. She gave him a countdown. And he ignored it. Calaman leaned on the railing, his forearms folding loosely. Krexare arrogance. Always thought size made them invincible. Threshneck's gaze flicked to the door, through which Zara had exited calm, almost bored, after casually dismantling a warrior who had slaughtered apex predators for sport. "You saw her eyes," he said quietly. Calaman nodded, his expression somber. "Adrenaline, noradrenaline. Their bodies aren't built for peace." "Peace?" Threshneck spat, his scales flashing an angry crimson. "They adapt. Do you understand what that means? Most species plateau evolution picks a lane and stays there. Humans? They change mid-fight." The Centauran grunted. That wasn't change. That was release. Everything civilized locked in a cage until something snaps it open. He turned his gaze toward the medics below, who were strapping Vextal onto the stretcher. "And Krexare boy, they just handed her the key." Threshnock stared as the medics began moving Vextal out, the Krexare's compound eyes glassy with pain and something darker confusion. Maybe even fear. "You think the council will hear about this?" the Naga asked. Calaman's lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "By morning, every Federation channel will have footage of a soft-skinned Deathworlder folding. A Krexare champion like scrap metal. Good luck keeping that quiet." Threshneck hissed softly, his scales flickering a mournful blue. "And the other species? They'll want explanations." "They'll get one," Calaman said, his voice like a distant storm. "A simple one. Don't start fights with humans. You won't like how they end." Asterisk down in the corridor, the medical team guided the stretcher toward the infirmary, its anti-grav hum harmonizing with the low groan vibrating in Vextal's throat. Every bump in the deck sent tremors of pain across his frame, but pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence in his head, the void where arrogance used to live. He'd mocked their physiology. He'd called their world tame. He'd believed his strength a universal law. And then a small, bloodied human had torn that law apart in less time than it took to draw breath. Her words replayed, looping endlessly in the hollow of his mind. "Everything breaks. The trick is knowing where to push." A shiver crawled down his spine, setting his fractured plates jangling. For the first time in his life, Commander Vextal wondered not if he was the strongest in the galaxy, but if strength had ever belonged to him at all. And somewhere down the corridor, Zara Mitchell was probably already cleaning her face and heading for that thermodynamics exam like nothing happened. Tomorrow, she'd come back to train. And when she did, the galaxy would keep pretending humans were harmless. Vextol knew better now, and that knowledge tasted a lot like fear. Asterisk, the medical bay was quiet, save for the steady hum of the biocast polymer hardening around Vextal's shattered arm. It encased his limb from shoulder to claw tip like a translucent coffin, glowing faintly as millions of nanothreads stitched bone fragments into reluctant alignment. Neural suppressors pulsed in sync with his heart, dulling the pain to a heavy ache that throbbed deep in his core. The humiliation hurt worse. Vextol stared at the ceiling panels, their cold white glow mocking him with sterile indifference. A Krexare, war champion, undefeated in 200 matches. The apex predator of Krexnar's death rings. Reduced to this, Lying flat on a slab, armor plates scored with cracks. Mandibles clamped against the bitter taste of failure. The door sighed open. Heavy footsteps entered first, a slow, deliberate rhythm that spoke of mass and authority. Station. Commander Keith Moore filled the frame, his Arsenian bulk blotting out the light behind him. Muscles bunched beneath fur the color of scorched bronze, his towering frame balanced with the easy precision of a creature that could crush bone without trying. Yet his dark eyes carried something unexpected. Pity? Commander Vextel, Moore rumbled, voice like distant thunder. He lowered himself into a chair that groaned under his weight. We need to talk. Vextel turned his head with effort, mandibles grinding softly. If you've come to strip me of rank, he rasped, do it quickly. Moore's ears twitched a gesture that might have been amusement if his expression hadn't stayed flat. Not here for that, he said, setting a datapad on his knee. I'm here because of this. The pad flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow that painted the Arsenian's fur in ghostlight. Lines of text scrolled past incident reports, combat telemetry, biometric data. Vextel caught fragments of his own shame between bursts of static, fracture at joint plate 3A, catastrophic leverage. Neural overload. Moore's gaze pinned him like a spear. You know what happened today? I was careless, Vextel hissed, his voice brittle as glass. I underestimated her speed. Moore's head tilted. No, he said quietly. You underestimated her species. Vextel's antennae twitched in confusion. Moore tapped the pad. The display shifted, blooming into a rotating holla of a planet, a sphere of blue and green, veined with storm white. Earth. You read the first page of their classification file, Moore said. Stopped at the word human. Big mistake. He zoomed in on the globe, continents swelling like muscle fibers under a microscope. You think this is a mild world? Let me educate you. Gravity 9.8 meters per second squared? Higher than most inhabited systems. Atmosphere? Thick. Oxygen content? Rich enough to ignite metabolic engines you can't imagine. And predators. The holla fractured into a flickering carousel of images. Sleek cats with fangs like labor blades. Canids with bone-crushing jaws. Serpents slick with venom potent enough to fell a shardened crystal beast in seconds. Asterisk. These, Moore said, his claws tracing the air like punctuation marks, are the apex predators of their homeworld. And humans? Didn't just survive alongside them. They hunted them. For sport. Vextel stared, disbelief churning with something colder. But their physiology, dense bones, Moore cut in. Fast-twitch muscle fibers optimized for explosive force. Redundant organ systems. Neural pathways tuned for reflex and adaptation. And the kicker? He leaned forward, his massive frame casting Vextel in shadow. They're one of the few. Species that get stronger the more you hurt them. You saw it yourself. Pain doesn't break them. It wakes them up. The holla shifted again this time to a human skeletal model, data flaring around points of articulation, stress tolerances, glowing in savage reds. Moore stabbed a claw at the display. That arm she broke? Do you know how she knew where to hit? Because her species learned to dismantle bigger, faster killers long before they touched the stars. They evolved for asymmetric warfare before. The word existed. Vextel's mandibles clicked in mute horror. His thoughts reeled back to Zara's calm voice, the blood trailing down her face, the countdown whispered like a death sentence. Not everything breaks. The trick is knowing where to push. Moore's tone softened, but only slightly. You made the same mistake everyone makes. You saw soft skin and no claws, and you assumed weakness. His eyes hardened. There's nothing soft about a species. That calls a Deathworld home, and walks off the apex throne without looking back. The silence stretched, filled only by the low pulse of the regeneration field. Vextal swallowed against the weight in his chest. "What happens now?" "That," Moore said, rising with ursine grace, "depends on you." He flicked the datapad once, sending a document streaming into Vextal's vision. Cadet Mitchell filed her report. Surprisingly generous, considering you hit her first. She's requested no disciplinary action, on one condition. Vextal forced his dry throat to work. Condition? You complete a mandatory xenobiology course on Deathworld. Species. Moore paused, the corner of his muzzle quirking in something that wasn't quite a smile. And starting next cycle, you'll be teaching humans exclusively. Vextal froze. You expect me to train them? Moore's chuckle rumbled like distant thunder. No, Commander. They requested you. Said your methods were educational. He tapped the door control and stepped into the hall, his voice drifting back like an echo of judgment. Class begins in 6 weeks. Heal fast. The door sighed shut, sealing Vextal inside with the hollow hum of the biocast dot. He stared at the ceiling, at the soft glow of the monitors, at the fractured lines of his own pride. Then slowly he laughed. Dot started as a brittle rasp, then grew into a chittering crescendo that filled the sterile bay like a storm of broken glass. He had come to teach humans what real combat looked like. Instead, they had taught him what survival truly meant. Dot, and tomorrow he would wake to the same truth beating in his skull like a war drum. The galaxy's most terrifying weapon didn't come from Krexnara. It came from Earth, and it had a smile like Zara Mitchell's *, the end.